yes, I would say, yeah, it started.
I think I put sit
Yeah,
actually.
very well. Okay, if I may take off this mask. Don't worry, I'm already multiple vaccinated and also an alumni from COVID, actually. And anyway, yeah, thank you very much, Pak Rainer, regarding the kind introduction. Can everybody hear me here? Can you hear me? I mean, does the audio work? Okay. No, we agreed before that I should speak in English. I can do the same thing also in Indonesian. I believe that everybody is fluent in English here. For the ones that don't understand Indonesian, in case I speak Indonesian, later when the question and answer comes, then I think we believe have translators, right? Yes. Okay, good. Great. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak a few words. Can I have the slide, perhaps?
Sorry, maybe use this one.
Okay, this is okay. Now I can hear it. Good. So basically, well, I was asked to say a few words about this. Maybe some more words about Wantiknas for the ones that don't know about us. This is a advisory committee actually, which is interestingly very cross-sectoral. So the members are from all parts of society. I mean, we have government officials there. We have people like me that are more from the business sector. Also, we do have academicians, and lastly, also people from the so-called civil society, whether it's NGOs or think tanks, etc., etc. And so you can see that in the first slide. Can I have the first slide, please? Or second, actually. So we do have an executive team, which is described in the box below. And I'm in that position since, gosh, I think it's like almost 8 years, plus actually, January 2014. So I started actually under the then President SBY, and surprisingly, until now, I'm still there. So, the steering committee is, of course, only government. So what our function is to give input to government, which is chaired by the president himself, and the daily head is the Minister for Planning, or the head of Bapenas. So I do report directly to Mr. Suharto Wonoafa, and this is my 5th boss, I think, in now 8 years. So I had a lot of dynamic situation to face because of the changes at the ministry. Can I have the next slide, please? So these are the roles of Wantiknas, and you just focus on the blue script, which is basically we do help the government to formulate policy and give strategic direction. We try to help also resolving existing problems and strategic issues. We do coordinate nationally, not only actually with central, but also with local government. As an example, I've been asked by the governor of Bali to assist in the acceleration of the so-called digital transformation of Bali. We can speak about that later. It's quite specific and actually a little bit beyond the usual. Then we also sometimes, occasionally, are asked to give approval. That hasn't happened very often, to be frank. And the last thing that was actually delivered to us as a decree was last year by the minister himself. We are also supposed to support the digital transformation in Indonesia in general, and that is, I think, the topic today. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is a few words about how we understand the president is looking at digital transformation. You see all these 5 points, and I think one point I like to highlight here is maybe point number 3, actually, because we will talk even more about that later. It's about the data itself. I mean, in Indonesia, as in many other countries, data is already understood as something very, very valuable. However, the handling of the data itself is something which is still quite a big issue. We do have the situation that various ministries have their own data center, and if you compare them regarding the data that they contain, then even though the data should show the same result, it doesn't really. And so that has to do with the integration of the data, and in the plan is actually to have a national data center organization, which is still not really in place. But since 2014, we do have a moratorium in the government for new data centers. So what we see in the September to be exact. September 2014, there has been a presidential decree that actually forbade the establishment of new data centers in the government. It's not allowed. But there is a loophole, of course. And so what government ministries do, they don't erect new ones, but they renovate or expand existing ones. So that is basically the loophole, and therefore we can still expand it, but there are constraints to that because you cannot erect a completely new one. It has to be within the existing. But the ideal case would be to have a national data center organization that will encompass all the data there is, and that would be responsible for all. Where these data is being kept is a different matter, but there is somebody centrally being responsible. And that is actually a common theme within Indonesia, that the strategic direction for ICT and leadership is still lacking. I mean, we don't have really one person or one institution which is completely responsible for ICT, but there's various roles for various ministries, and sometimes there are overlapping, and that causes a lot of delay and a lot of confusion. Can I have the next, please? So let's talk a little bit about Indonesia's digital landscape. Next, please. So right now, the latest state says basically in 2022, you can see this by APJI, which is the Indonesia Internet Service Provider Association, that the penetration is about 77%, which is not bad. It is also not very surprising for in my case, from my view, that actually more than half of that are really the millennials, right? Between 5 and 34 millennials are so-called digital natives. They are the bulk of the internet users. So out of the 77% internet users of our total population, more than half are actually those young people. Well, as we know, Indonesia has a very broad-based pyramid, which is actually our chance, also the challenge, right? We can perhaps find digital adaptation quicker than other countries. At the same time, we have to provide jobs for these people, right? They can come digitally or not, and so that is the big challenge here. So the growth, as you can see in the middle part of the slide, has been quite good. So in 5 years, we have gone from 64% to more than 3/4 of Indonesia can be already classified as internet users. Can I have the next, please? So basically, the potential of the economy. Yeah, well, right now, Indonesia, as of last year, can be said is the most valuable digital economy in the whole of Southeast Asia, even including Singapore. Singapore is a very small country, however, they do have a very big GDP compared to their size, and so we can imagine that the digital portion of that is also not small. But Indonesia, with its growth and also its current dynamics when it comes to startups, I'm going to say a little bit more about that later. Yes, we are actually having now the largest digital economy and potential from investment value and its potential in the whole of Southeast Asia. And looking at that, of course, it is also important to understand that the main pillar of Indonesia's economy in general is the so-called SMEs, or in Indonesian language, UKM. Yeah? So those, I think, 99% of the companies that are basically Indonesia, or more than that actually, and also quite big number of people that are working, basically they come from small and medium-sized enterprises, also more than 95% for sure, that work at companies, they all work at small and medium-sized enterprises. So the digitalization of that, of course, is very important, because this is basically the main part of the economy. And it is also understood that actually, as you can see from these numbers, that 87% of the small and medium-sized enterprises, they already are running the business online. Yeah? There are still few that don't really see the need for that, but I think that personally, I think that will, even though the 12-point-something% that don't run the business online, they will also slowly but slowly and surely shift online, at least for the transactional part. I mean, e-payment and e-money and what is that? Other forms of transactions digitally are actually not only considered to be quick, but that they're also more and more safe, and they're also low cost. Yeah, and so there's a lot of economic benefit for all those players. entrepreneurs and the small, medium-sized part of our business, of our economy that are getting a lot of benefits from that. Can I have the next? So you can see here from these very jittery slides, there's basically this is basically showing you a picture about 6 countries in Southeast Asia, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Vietnam. And you see basically how much the growth has been in order to join e-commerce. It is really within, what is that, a certain number of years. This is like 4 years, 4.5 years. In Indonesia, the amount has been like 18 times, and in Malaysia 13 times, Philippines 9, etc., etc. And when it comes to particularly e-wallet payments, you see a similar picture. The biggest surge here seems to be in Malaysia and Philippines, but it is, I think, fair to say that in the whole of Southeast Asia, the digital payment or digital commerce, e-commerce, has become quite accepted all over the economy, so not only for the big companies, but particularly also for the small companies. So, and as I said before, a few words about startups in Indonesia, which is sort of like an indicator of how vivid the current digital economy scene really is. We do have now, 12, in fact, unicorns. And they are listed there, you can read it yourself. But one of them is actually already more than 10. It's a decacorn, which is basically go-to. Right? So this is not small by any means. And I saw a statistic once where startup ecosystems or cities were compared with one another. Jakarta was deemed to be a second tier, so not like Silicon Valley, Stockholm, Berlin, London, but one tier below that. But within that second tier of startup environment cities, Jakarta was number 2. So number 1 was actually Mumbai. So India and Indonesia, in terms of their dynamics, in terms of their enthusiasm, and in terms of the initiatives that have been taken by the local entrepreneurs, is actually quite renowned. And I remember some years back, there was a delegation from Berlin, Germany, coming to Indonesia from the Berlin Senate, and they were focusing on also linking the startup scene in Berlin with the ones of the cities they were visiting in Asia, that were Bangalore, Jakarta, and if I'm not mistaken, it was Manila. I'm not sure about the last. But to the best of my remembrance, they were very happy with the collaboration between Berlin and Jakarta. We have to remember Berlin and Jakarta are sister cities. And so there's a lot of collaboration happening. And that happens not only with Berlin, but also with other cities. But yes, I think the dynamics here in Jakarta particularly is, I think, quite good, and can find a lot of resonance in other parts of the world. Yeah, can I have the next slide, please? So what does our country really do to implement our economy more on the digital side? Can I see more, please? Thank you. So first of all, we have to talk about the rules and regulation. In Indonesia, the Indonesia Financial Service Authority, or OJK, they have been very active in order to push the envelope. I've heard from other regulators from other countries that Indonesia is actually quite advanced, yeah, when it comes to regulations driven by the market. I mean, in the concept is that in the beginning it's being tried out in a so-called sandbox, and then through that, basically there's a co-creation, co-development process happening between the OJK and the players themselves. And this blueprint is basically something as an outcome of that process. And there's basically 5 points. We have to think about the data, technology, risk management, and the collaboration aspect, also the arrangements between the institutions themselves. And so basically, when we talk about data, of course, the protection, the transfer, the governance, this is all important. Technology is also about governance, of course, but it's also about the architecture itself and some of the things related to the adoption. Risk management is something very crucial for banking, and so that needs to be also upheld, actually, even though it is, of course, paramount to keep the risk management at the same level as in the so-called analog world, but digital has to be minimum the same standard as in the analog world, and so the risk management is something which is also having a very close look at the cybersecurity aspect. Then collaboration is also something very important. Sharing platforms, collaboration between banks, and what is not written here, collaboration actually between banks and fintech, because banks are usually not really having the access, whether it's because they don't have the technology or the human resources, or sometimes they're not allowed actually to do this because of regulation. So what happens in the banking space, I've been a banker myself at some point in time, not anymore, so I have a little insight about that. There is a channeling. So basically banks work with fintech in order to reach certain parts of the economy that need a credit, but they cannot get a credit from a bank, because if you're a bank, then you have to give a collateral, and there is certain rule, they have to have a certain number of years profit, et cetera, which is all not the case. But on the other hand, there are quite potential to basically return the money because they have the economic power. And so there is a collaboration between lending startups that have the technology to basically evaluate the client based on the data they have, and then take the money from the bank. Basically, the bank becomes a super lender, and the lender is then the fintech. That happens a lot in Indonesia already. So many of those fintechs that are catering to, say, agricultural companies or actually small, medium-sized enterprises themselves, etc., they do work with banks to be the channeling partner, basically. Yeah. Institutional arrangements, I can read it here, so it's basically funding, support, leadership, etc. And then the next slide, what we're going to see, so this is basically the rules and regulation, which is very important when we want to talk about digital economy. There has to be something as a guidance, as a framework that we understand how we want to do these things. And can I have the next, please? Thank you. Okay, this is a lot, I know. This is basically what has been said just a few days ago by the Minister Johnny Plate at the DEWG, or Digital Economy Working Group, which is related to G20. As we all know, Indonesia has this year the presidency, and so there is a working group of the G20 talking about the digital economy. Just to refresh our memory, Indonesia's three-folded strategy is basically to have, to focus on the global health system, what is that? To renovate that in view of the still lingering COVID crisis. And then the second is basically transforming the economy through digitalization. And the last one is, of course, transition into the renewable energy space. So basically, the second one is basically talking about this. So how do we actually make it work? And there's 4 strategies here. We have to develop logistics. Then we have to develop the skills for the 21st century, which is basically talking about literacy. And the last one, the second last one is we have to promote the digital financial service that I just was talking about when I was talking about Financial Service Authority. And there's a role to play for tax policy, of course, in order to ensure that there is a level playing field when it comes for, or more of a level playing field when it comes to digital economy, which I think from our personal experience, we know this is not the case, right? So we know that digital economy means actually, in many cases, unfortunately, that the winner takes it all. Or there are companies that dominate a certain sector globally by an enormous amount of percentage. So that is actually something very difficult, but I believe that tax policy can be playing a role in order to at least level it on a national level. Well, I don't want to read all of that. I think that's a bit too much, but I believe that the presentation can be made available to all the participants. And if there's questions, otherwise, I'll be happy to answer those even after the conference. I think this is the last slide, if I'm not mistaken. Can you scroll down? Is there one more to come? Oh yeah, well, this is actually what I said before. There is basically 3 things still to be said, that there are 3 priorities: the post-COVID recovery and connectivity, then the skills and literacy, and then what I did not mention before is the cross-border data flow and data free flow with trust. So the data itself needs to be, this is a big discussion point in Indonesia. We are now in the process of implementing, or actually discussing this law about the data security and the data in IT. And this is something where I think just recently some of these very big companies had to sign basically a declaration that would abide to the rules in Indonesia, which if they don't do it, they can basically be asked to take the services down. And it's quite something quite heavy, because Indonesia has some particular rules when it comes to certain topics like pornography or related to hate speech, I think is also something, because I think the concern of Indonesia's government is that because of the very avid use of the social media, that there can be a quite stirring up of the emotions in our society, which is very closely knit, and therefore that needs to be watched actually in a different way than in other countries. Okay, I think that's all I have to say. I think a little advertisement for ourselves, as I said, Wantiknas, so for the ones that are interested in more things that we do, please be you're very welcome to visit our website here. You see it on the right lower side, or visit us even our office. And we do have some of these analysis or reports that are already published, and you can download them basically on that website and have a look. Okay, I think that's all for today, and I give it back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Round of applause for this concise presentation. That gave so much space for discussion, and I have lots of questions, but I shouldn't take the space. If anyone here in the room has a question, or also, of course, our online participants on the Zoom call. So asking anyone whether you would like to already ask a question, ask for clarification. If not, then I'm going to kickstart the discussion
Okay.
with my questions. So thank you so much for this overview of what's happening, and it's of course impressive. In the scale of transformation, Indonesia is certainly considered an early adopter. You just mentioned the e-wallets. You can see how people embrace it and go for it. And also the country is not burdened with old technologies that have been costly to implement for credit card payments, etc., like in other countries. And therefore people adopt it rapidly, and it's growing quickly. Now, this is something we already see unfolding, so I would like you to take out your crystal ball and look a little now into the future. So what are the trends? We see the government is trying to keep up with regulations and everything, but where are the trends that you see in the next 1 or 2 decades? I don't know how far you want to go in this, because we see industries affected on different levels. We see the large business platforms, the digital service providers, they are going through some sort of transformation. You mentioned the small, medium-sized enterprises. They rely on services, they offer services. For them, it's an entirely different game altogether compared to the very big ones. And then we, of course, in this country always look at micro enterprises and how can they enjoy the opportunities from the digital sphere. So maybe we'll just start with the bigger picture. So what are the trends in terms of consumption, customer behavior, new technological improvements? What do you think is going to dominate the discussions in the next decade?
Okay. Yeah, if you talk about decades, yeah, may I maybe go like 24, 23 years into the future, where we as Indonesians have already declared in 2045 we want to see the so-called golden Indonesia, meaning that Indonesia wants to be a industrialist country by then. Yeah? That if you measure that in economic terms, right now the average income per capita per year is about $4,000. When we want to go into this club of being an industrialist country, then we have to surpass 12,000. That means that we have to have an increase by 3-fold within the space of 23 years. How to achieve that? Can we basically continue what we're doing right now and automatically just by working in the same way, but maybe more coordinated or more digital or whatever? Can it work out? In my view, no. We have to go into a type of economy which much more relies on creating more added value. On added value means that we have to go more into digitalization, not only of the transaction of the products that we produce today and services, but we have to create new products and new services. And how? Digitally. And what does it really mean? Yeah, so, well, I'm an engineer, as you already declared, and so I have to go a bit technically, I'm sorry. So basically, if you imagine that in today's world that many things you can buy online, you can also, in many cases, actually get to know how to produce those things digitally. I mean, you have to get the blueprint online. And we know at the same time that there are machines available which don't cost a lot of money that can produce those products at your desk or in a neighborhood somewhere. You do it yourself. Can be something very simple, maybe a spare part for something that you can produce yourself. Instead of ordering some factory in Europe or in China or in the United States, you get that blueprint. Maybe you have to pay for that, sometimes you don't, and you do it yourself. Yeah? Now let's do something very simple, just a small spare part of a, say, motorcycle. Yeah? Doesn't have maybe a bolt this large, and you can do it yourself. Yeah? Now let's go a little bit more complex. How about doing the whole motorcycle yourself? Is that possible? Well, I mean, if you talk about the possibilities, technologically speaking, yes. There are blueprints already created by many creators around the world that basically give you a design of something as complex as a motorcycle or e-scooter. I have to say that politically correct. It's an e-scooter. You can do yourself. Yeah, not everything. Maybe you have to buy the battery, you have to buy the tire, you have to buy certain parts of the electric motor, but much of the frame, etc., you can do yourself. So now let's think even bigger. Yes, you can do not only a motorcycle, but maybe you can do other things with the same machine. Yeah, I'm talking about the same machine. There's digital printers, these are digital laser cutters, digital this, digital that. You can do so many things yourself. And now think about what does it actually mean. It means actually that in the future, that's my personal prediction, we will see economies thriving where much more localization of manufacturing will be taking place. Because to get that kind of digital literacy, it's not easy, but it's also not rocket science. Yeah? It's not rocket science, but it's also not easy. You have to invest into upgrading your skills. You have to have digital literacy, you have to understand technology, you have to understand certain craftsmanships of assembling things together in the right way. You can learn that. Yeah? So what I foresee, there is going to be some sort of a backlash from globalization. I mean, in the past world, which is still there, is still today's world. We have these paradigms, say, from China that say the factory of the world, meaning to say everything is produced in China. Nobody can eat as cheap as China. Yeah. But I mean, we don't want to be also, we've seen it in the COVID crisis too, overly dependent on just one country or one factory. I think there's going to be much more of distributed work, manufacturing centers around the world. And it doesn't mean that it is industrialization of in 4.0 scheme or in the 21st century is not that kind of ugly industrialization where you basically where you contaminate the world. You don't. I mean, this is something you can manage. And in fact, what I believe, we all talk about circular economy. I think it's much easier to manage if you know what you need. Or at least you do it within your community or city. There is movements in the world that stem originally from an idea that came from MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, that says Fab Lab. Fab Lab means basically you produce as much as you can yourself. And that's not only manufacturing, it goes as much as energy. Why not have your own solar cell in your house that can produce electricity for you or for whatever you want to do? Food, we are talking about urban food or about vertical food, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that mankind will be much more empowered to do more things for themselves locally as before. And that needs technology, that needs digital things. So what does it mean for Indonesia? Well, I was telling you before that Bali is working with Wantiknas in terms of, well, I'm a member of the so-called task force for the acceleration of the digital transformation of Bali. Yeah, there is something like this, which is headed by the governor, Mr. Wayan Koster, and I'm one of his team members, basically. Yeah? So what I propagate is the idea that basically Bali should embrace exactly that, because we have actually a lot of creative skills in Bali. Yeah? Just think about Bali. There's a lot of artists there that do sculptures, that do paintings, that do other craftsmanships. They're quite good in that, yeah. But they do it still in the original way, I mean the traditional way. Just imagine we would funnel that talent, empower it through digital means, and let them create other things. I think it could be because the governor was complaining about being overly dependent on tourism. I mean, in 2020, the economy in Bali locally went down by 8%, in 21 by 2-point-something%, because they are 70 to 80% dependent on tourism, which is not healthy, right? And so there needs to be something else. Most people tell the governor, you have to go back to natural resources, let them be farmers, let them be fishermen. Nobody wants to do that. Today's generation, they want to do something different, right? So, and in fact, that's not creating more added value, it's actually less added value. Yeah. So this is just a sneak preview of what could happen to other parts of Indonesia, of Bali, maybe the world, basically having independent communities, and that is actually gathered under another banner called Fab City. Fab City movement is actually in a bigger, bigger context, adhering to the Fab Lab module, which says you produce as much as you can yourself. Fab cities that confines that to a city or to a, there could be, there are cities like Barcelona, they have already embraced that. I think Berlin, if I'm not mistaken, then Boston, and soon Bali. So Bali is going to be a Fab Island declared in October this year. And so the intention is by 2054, yes, we still have some time, clock is ticking though, Bali wants to be as much as possible independently producing the things they need for themselves.
Thank you. Thank you.
So that is basically, I know it's very, you were asking me for decades, decades, not tomorrow. This is decades.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that perspective is obviously necessary. And I also like the optimism that comes out of your comments. So it's not rocket science, it's doable.
It's doable.
Reminds me, I visited a vocational school in Kudus for just local kids, a very ordinary neighborhood. They teach animation skills, and all these kids there had like 2 massive screens in front of them in which they created these animated characters, and all of them had a little 3D printer next to them to print out the prototypes that they were designing. And I was more than amazed to see how these kids were mastering the technologies, mastering the 3D printing. So there's a lot of skills that is already in the market. And that leads us nicely to a question that's coming in from one of our Zoom participants, Anchori from Universitas Indonesia, who's asking in that direction exactly. There are so many digital skills that are needed for a digital economy. Are you aware that there is any prioritization by the Indonesian government? What digital skills should be nurtured first? Is there categorized by urgency?
Well, I can't say that this is an official thing that has been declared by the Indonesian government, but if I look at, for instance, what has been done by the Ministry for Education and Culture, they have embarked upon a journey called Campus Merdeka, which is basically allowing students and also school children to take on courses that are not delivered at the university or learning institution and get it from somewhere else. And what kind of courses are that? Well, there are courses about AI, artificial intelligence, so that's one. The other one would be cloud computing, data science, general knowledge how to use certain types of software. I'm not saying programming here, but I think programming will come also at some point in time. And it doesn't mean, I mean, people are sometimes saying, oh, I don't want to be a programmer, so why should I learn that? Well, it's like you're saying, I don't want to learn writing because I don't want to be a journalist. It doesn't really mean that you have to be a programmer, but I think it is understood that in the 21st century there's a certain amount of basic knowledge needed in order to understand the digital economy better. So having the insight about basic things regarding programming doesn't mean you have to become a programmer, but it's as you learn reading and writing, right? It's something very basic. And so I think those kind of skills is necessary. These are the hard skills, yeah? But there's soft skills like, okay, how about critical thinking? How about problem solving? How about collaboration in teams? Particularly if it's offline, online. There's a lot of things that are happening. Also, always, it is always emphasized, which is not necessarily digital, but it is maybe slightly different when it is digital, is the entrepreneurship, right? Entrepreneurship is something universal. It's not only digital, but there is something digital entrepreneurship. I think that is also understood to be, seen as being important. Yeah, I can see that because I see that in the context of the so-called Campus Merdeka curriculum. And there's something new called Sekolah Merdeka, which is also emphasizing a similar thing, but it's more geared towards high school and lower. Yeah.
I'm still looking in the round whether anybody would like to ask a question. Anytime, please raise your hand. We're happy to include you in the discussion. There is a question actually in the back of the room. Kindly introduce yourself quickly. We know which organization you're from.
the opportunity. Good afternoon. My name is Rizky Gustian. I'm from the Ministry of Law and Human Rights. I'm curious, I'm sorry if my question is out of topics. I would like to know your views regarding cryptocurrency exchanges practices in Indonesia, because by March we have more than 12 million users in Indonesia, and how our law enforcers in our country see these issues, because I think it would be a big challenge for us, especially for asset tracking. Thank you.
Okay, I'm myself not a practitioner of that, so that I cannot tell you from my own experience. Well, you said it's 12 million users already. Are we sure that there are really 12 million individuals, or maybe one individual has more than one identity sometimes, so we don't know, yeah? So it's like one person has more than one mobile phone, right? That is also possible in Indonesia, very highly possible. But it shows for sure that a lot of people already doing it in Indonesia, yeah. So I think this is a very difficult topic, also because it's very difficult to enforce certain rules and regulations, because it's so, I don't know how to say it, but it's so difficult to monitor. Yeah? It's difficult to monitor, and the data, the crypto exchanges are not resident in Indonesia, but they're somewhere in the world, and there's so many different cryptocurrencies as well. I mean, it's not only Bitcoin, but there's Ethereum. There's so many, and if I'm not mistaken, some of our Indonesian celebrities have already started also to use their own coins, like Raffi Ahmad, I think, has already issued one, I forgot the name of it, and he has launched his own metaverse version called the Ransverse just recently. I think what we could do, just practically speaking, is to create something, a legal framework around the ones that we know are already resident in Indonesia. Yeah. Meaning there will be more and more people in Indonesia that are also embracing the crypto as a form of currency that enables their customers to basically get some commercial value out of it, and for them as well. And maybe we should focus first on the ones that are basically resident in Indonesia, and where we know that the data is actually landing here in Indonesia. In many cases, it's difficult. I mean, the data itself is here from a user standpoint of view, but the data is somewhere, right? It is not yet mandated, like in the case of, say, you are one of these big tech companies like Google, Amazon, or Apple. They are mandated to have data adhere to the laws in Indonesia, that the data should be here in Indonesia. At least a copy of that, and they can mirror the data to bring the data to another data center outside, and that is sometimes for security purposes, as a backup, but a copy of that needs to be here. So if the Indonesian authority, let's say the police or other law enforcement, we can get a hold of the data here. This is basically adhering to the principle of data sovereignty. In the in the cryptocurrency space, I'm not quite sure how that actually is, how does the picture really look like, and I presume that many of the cryptocurrencies that are at the moment traded in Indonesia are not resident here. So how to really get a hold of that in case there's fraud, in case there is money laundering, in case there's tax evasion, we don't know. Yeah, I'm afraid I can't give you a straight answer. That is highly complex. But from a practical standpoint of view, I observe that there are Indonesian celebrities usually. They start to create their own version of that for their own benefit and also for the benefit of their customers. Let's start there first and see how we would do it actually with the ones that are here resident in Indonesia. Once we understand this, then maybe, because what we see in crypto right now, they're going through a lot of up and down. Bitcoin has lost 50% of its value, I think, just recently, and we're going to see much more up and down of that. Yeah, so crypto itself is not really established. But what we will see is basically a conglomeration or concentration of of cryptocurrency players. So once it's clear who are the winners, who are the losers, then I think we can go ahead and say, okay, company X, Y, Z, you need to be resident in Indonesia. You need to have your data here because there's a lot of customers you have, and I think the leverage of Indonesia is always very big because we have so many people, right? So for them, it's a big lucrative market they can they can lose if they don't adhere to our regulation. On the other hand, I think that cryptocurrency has always this little bit free spirit kind of attitude. Yeah? They actually are there because they don't want authority. Right? I mean, that's how Bitcoin started, right? They don't want a central bank. So crypto is not crypto, right? There's crypto like Bitcoin, there's crypto like Ethereum, there's different types of crypto. It's really a class of e-currencies, yeah? That's what I can say. Unfortunately, I don't know more than this. Thank you.
I think these kind of, thank you, and I think these challenges come really with your position, because you had in your own slide that you are seeking digital transformation of health, education, business,
Yeah.
the entire society. So obviously it affects everything, and therefore questions, I'm pretty sure come to you quite often on many, many special areas. This is just one. We have another one from the audience on Zoom about the tax and customs system. So to what extent has that been digitized?
Okay, that's also a quite complex question. I think if you think about, let's do tax first maybe. Tax, if you talk about tax, basically filing your tax report, this is already happening quite digitally. Yeah? And I know that some of the Indonesian ministry are already linked with one another. So if you are a company that exports things, you have to report obviously to the Ministry for Trade. Yeah? That report is actually linked to the tax people, which is a different ministry. So there's no way that you can basically declare export and at the same time you don't declare it. It's automatically known. So the link and match of the data that you as a business person, either individually or as a company, have to file digitally, which is now more and more the case, actually helps the tax system in order to really understand what kind of tax amount they should expect from you being a business person. Right? That's, I think, is more and more difficult to evade tax there. However, I know also that the tax rate in Indonesia is still very low. We have only 10%, a little bit more than 10%. So the tax rate, there's still some improvement to be made. Customs is, I think there are certain things that are not yet digitalized, meaning to say you still have to do a lot of paperwork. Yeah? Paperwork like, let's assume you want to import things and you have to basically declare things and put it still on paper, and which is making things very slow. I'm active in an organization called ICC. Maybe you know of ICC, International Chamber of Commerce. We focus on global trade, and the digitalization of customs actually and tax is a major roadblock to make Indonesia more effective and efficient when it comes to exporting our own goods, which means also importing goods more efficiently. Yeah. So that is very high on the list, the digitalization of the global trade system, and there's still a lot of discussions. I can't give any concrete examples about deadlines, but I think it is something which is already quite there, particularly about tax. Customs, when it comes to certain types of paperwork, I think like bill of loading. Yeah. That is still, you have to file it basically. You can maybe scan it in, but you still have to file it basically and fill it out. It's not really online. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let me turn the discussion a little in a different direction. Because we're talking about, yesterday also we talked about digitalization of trade in the global value chains. Now we hear about customs, cryptocurrencies. Sometimes we're worried that certain parts of Indonesian society are charging ahead, embracing the digital sphere, use it, thrive on it, make money on it, etc. And another large part of the Indonesian society is getting increasingly disconnected. We saw on your slide that an internet penetration of 77% is a massive increase from just 5 years earlier, but it still means that 23% are not yet having access. So that has infrastructure reasons, and it has other reasons as well. So how do you see that happening and developing in the next decade? Will Indonesia manage to get substantially more people to access the internet? And how will that change life for those who have been disconnected before?
Okay, I think there is an economic aspect of that. Yeah. If you want to be connected, then yes, connectivity itself is an issue, which is not as big an issue anymore as it used to be. So there's a lot of infrastructure already available in Indonesia. The backbone called the Palapa Ring has been completed, or is in the process, I shouldn't say has been completed, it's in the process of completion, with some holes, say in Papua, in certain parts of Kalimantan, on some islands. It's still not 100% complete. It is not only a monetary challenge, meaning from an investment standpoint of view, but also technically. I mean, let's talk about Papua, for instance. Right? Papua, I remember there was a case, there was a good landline, meaning fiber optics landline available, but then there came an earthquake and the whole thing was destroyed. And so big parts of Papua were without internet for quite some time because of that. Yeah. So for difficult areas like Papua, one solution is obviously the satellite. Yeah. So satellite in Indonesia has been used since many, many years. Actually, Indonesia, for telecommunication purposes, I mean, Indonesia has been the third country in the world that had its own satellite for telecommunication after the US and Canada. That was in the early 70s. But using satellite for internet connectivity is a different matter, right? That is still, I think, in talk. I think the Indonesian government has been in talk with various entrepreneurs. I don't need to name them right now, how to deliver cheap internet for the masses, but basically through using satellite applications. So there is a technological challenge. The other challenge is, of course, the economic. It's still, for many people, not affordable. Right? I mean, there's a cost to it. And yes, when it comes to schools or other social services that are needed by the government, then there is something like a subsidy by the government. Whether that's enough or not, I think there's some fine-tuning needed. But I think when it comes to things beyond that, and when you talk about economic development, then not all of that can be subsidized at the moment. That is, I think, a big challenge. Yeah. So even though, let's assume the internet infrastructure is already quite complete, but still people need to be in a position to afford it. Right? So there are ideas, actually, which I'm not quite sure of how serious these are, to make actually internet as affordable like electricity, you know, or running water. It's still not seen as that, yeah, not at the same level. As we might know, in Indonesia, in Java, the electricity is very cheap. You know, it is very affordable. Why not apply a similar pattern for internet? Yeah. Right now, the pricing is on the shoulders of the commercial sector, which are the big players. There's 3 big companies and some other medium-sized companies, and for them it's a business, right? So, but it's not regulated by government as to how much the pricing of the internet connectivity should be. But once it is realized as something which should not be commercial, but it should be seen as a meta infrastructure. Let's see if you would say that if you have a complete internet system which is affordable for all, in fact, extreme people should say it's for free, but I don't think it's going to happen. It's going to be some people have to pay for that still. Then many other services can be given in higher quality and also more effective. I'm talking about educational services, health services, or other services, basic social services of other kinds, can be better delivered, faster, and even at a lower cost if you would do it through the internet. So yes, there is maybe investment needed for internet, but it saves money at the same time as well. It makes also the delivery of those services more effective. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's something definitely also us in CIPS, we're also working on this, so make sure that, you know, this becomes accessible, and that requires investment, obviously, as you just said. There's also a monetary factor to this. Related question about the investment environment. Domestic direct investment, but also foreign direct investment, no matter either side. What do you think it needs to be priority in terms of policy reforms or policy changes to make the investment environment more attractive to get the investment in Indonesia that's needed?
Okay, this is a generic question. It's not necessarily only for digital means, right?
Mostly in the digital sector, yeah.
In the digital sector. Well, classically speaking, in Indonesia, what is always a big roadblock is certainty of what is that, certainty of the legal system. Yeah. So that the predictability of that, the rules and regulations sometimes come very unpredicted. They appear in a way that it's seen as not necessarily pro-business. Then I think what is also important is actually what about the human resources. Sometimes in order to make an investment working out well, you need a certain type of human resources, and sometimes it's not easy to get those in Indonesia, and so we have to basically import some of those from outside, and it's not easy to get that permission. Yeah. Sometimes very difficult. Other than that, certainty of law, tax. No, I think Indonesia is not that unattractive when it comes to tax. There are lower tax countries than Indonesia, like Singapore, for instance, but Indonesia is not really very high tax either. It's still reasonable.
But that's already a very good point. I mean, and we see that in many companies in Indonesia, that they do need to get this skilled labor from abroad for certain special areas. Yeah. And we see that in free trade agreements with Australia or other countries where there would be clauses in there that make it easier to actually get
well, in extreme cases, like some of these startups that we have, that I've presented before, in order to supply enough IT technology products to their system, they sometimes have to go out and buy companies outside Indonesia, and they're usually in India. They have subsidiaries in India where they basically give work to a lot of Indians that supply basically the products needed to Indonesia, because we don't have enough. Really. It's not that we don't have, but we don't have enough, particularly when it comes to senior level, and we don't have enough, for sure not.
And that links us nicely to maybe the last question that we can take, and this is coming from the Zoom audience. Margaret Ross Lederer, she's asking, I guess, besides all the hard skills, the technical skills that are necessary, there are also critical soft skills that are needed by those who want to build a digital company, digital environment here. To what extent can these critical soft skills be taught by elder mentors? I like that question. Potentially retired professionals who can share with the younger generation in the digital world what is needed.
Well, first of all, I'd like to extend my greetings to Margaret, because I know her. She is probably in Oakland right now. She's in California, and I've had some interaction with her in the past. She's very fluent in Bahasa Indonesia, can dance, Sundanese dances, etc. She's very Indonesianized. She used to live here too. So I know her. Hi, Margaret, wherever you are right now. Probably in Oakland.
Also from CIPS, because we've also been in touch with
her. So yeah, the question is quite clear. I wouldn't say retired, but I would say experienced professional, because it's all about the experience, the flight hours, right? I mean, talking about soft skills, it's basically human skills. So how do you actually work with other people? How do you provide leadership when the team is very diverse, right? It's a lot of different people, which is good. I think innovation or having dynamics in a company needs diversity. Right? If everybody is of the same opinion, everybody is yes man or yes woman, then you don't see a lot of innovation, I think, right? You need that. And how do you manage that as an entrepreneur, or she says she has a fab lab maker, right? And that how do you do this? And I think one of the best teachers you can find is experience. If you've gone through the process, you've had this case before, you know how to handle this. It's not something like copy paste, but you can learn from the experience, and then you apply it, and you have at least some input and have some orientation. Yeah, and I think these kind of soft skills are definitely needed by young people, because it's something you cannot learn from the book. You can learn it, you can look at it, and you can learn, but I think the experience is what matters. You need the experience of the flight hours. Yeah? And so that, I think, is something also best. We talk about Zoom call, about things in the virtual space, but sometimes you need a meeting, like meeting people like physically. Yeah, so that is still very important. I think the communication between humans cannot happen only confined to the monitor of a computer. Yeah, there are still some things like spontaneity, like group dynamics that cannot be found unless you're really in the same room.
And I think we see this happening in angel investments, where you see more experienced people getting as shareholders into startup companies. We see that in incubator networks, where you have more senior experts coming in as mentors for startups. I think it is happening a lot, and I believe it's also important that those with the senior experience are offering their time and their experience to those companies.
Exactly. Yeah.
So then with this, I would like to wrap up the discussion now after lunch. And if I may say so, I found it rather inspiring because of the optimism of somebody who's been working now for many years in Indonesia in the technology sector, trying to drive change, sustainable change through profitable enterprise. And I believe there's a lot to do, but I think what we can take from what you shared with us today is there is actually progress, and more is necessary, but also more can be done if everybody joins hands doing this. So thank you so much, and please let's all
You're
join
welcome.
hands. And thank
Terima
you.
kasih.